Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be drawing Chainsaw Man from the series Chainsaw Man. I recently went and saw the movie and I thought it was really good. I've drawn the character before. I did kind of a realistic interpretation of Chainsaw Man in a style that's a little more horror-esque, and that'll be here in the video. But today I'm going to be doing an ink drawing, which I don't usually do. I've only done a couple ink drawings and I'm not very good at it. I don't even have a style or anything that I can rely on, in terms of reliability for executing that style. I've drawn a few things here in the sketchbook, but I was in a couple. I was kind of doing a Frankenstein version. This part sort of cross-hatched, and then I was just working on flat colors to make form and see what I liked. And I kind of like the gray tones you can get with cross-hatching, and it's just kind of interesting. I did this sort of creepy female with a kind of rictus grin. But I sketched out a Chainsaw Man here. This is loosely based off of the image that is kind of the cover art for the Chainsaw Man Reze arc movie. I changed up the arm posture a little bit and the head posture. But I just wanted to, do an ink drawing because I've been into them a little bit lately and I think they're pretty fun. So I have Micron here, 1 and 3, and then my flat inks, my blacks, is just like this. This is actually just a watercolor brush pen. I don't have necessarily a better way of doing it right now since I don't have the tools. So that's kind of what I'm going to be doing. Chainsaw Man, I think, is just a really cool concept. I think the character design is pretty wicked, and it has these themes or this look of horror, and I don't know, in a way it's a sort of juvenile humor that goes on in the show, and I haven't actually read the manga or comic. I don't know if there's truly a difference between manga and comics. I was trying to look that up, and so far as I can tell, it's a term that we use in the West largely to differentiate American comic books from graphic novels from the Japanese counterparts. And I was looking for some other differences, and there are some. Like in manga, the creator is usually generally the artist and the writer, and they don't really pass along their franchises. Like, as soon as Chainsaw Man is done, in theory, it's not necessarily going to be picked up by a different writer and illustrator to work on it. And so, I think that's kind of a unique concept because a lot of the popular comic book characters that we have today in America have kind of run their course, and they've run it for a long time. There's always these origin stories and trying to shake them up a little bit, but ultimately the characters are what they are. And it seems like manga is happy enough with that to just let them go once their time has come. And when I was researching a little bit about the creative mind behind this, his name, and I'm probably not going to say it right, is Tatsuki Fujimoto. I got a little upset when I saw that he was 33 years old, or 32 possibly, and because Chainsaw Man is already like 7 or 8 years old, and so he was producing these sort of artworks at a pretty young age. And when you look up the comic panels, they are, I think, really impressive works of art. And I've come to think that about most comic art lately, is just how good they are as artists to be able to pull off what they're trying to do. I started my journey doing, my goal was to kind of do realistic interpretations of a lot of, just horror type stuff that maybe isn't generally done in pencil as often. And that's kind of why I've fallen for the black paper, is it creates a mood and a tone that, you just automatically maybe don't get with pure white paper. And so I was watching a lot of traditional artists, and I just kind of thought, like, my ignorant take at the time is, oh, these guys are the best. How could you simplify it down to, like, comics for black and white? And as I've branched more into trying to become a better artist on the whole, I actually now kind of think comic book artists are, maybe the most talented because of the broad range of stuff they have to pull off in their drawings, from architectural work to character design to drapery to, you name it. There's so much that goes into pulling off a single panel in a comic book. And I don't know, I just never realized that before. So, in general, I guess, respect artists, because all of it is challenging and all of it is cool. None of this is easy to do. If you watched my last video, you'll know that my Invisible Man drawing was super hard to do. And one of the things I thought that was cool about comic book art is it just kind of has a lot more energy to it. If you're trying to do realism, everybody knows what that looks like in a way. Of course, you might be drawing something that hasn't existed, but people are going to judge it based on how realistic it looks. And as humans, we are a pretty good judge of that when we are just viewing something. And so, I don't know, there's just something really cool about simplifying ideas down and drawings down. It's a creative decision that, isn't necessarily made per se in traditional art or realism. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just another process that I am coming to really respect, is this process by which you identify what is essential. And it reminds me a lot more of writing. Because when you write, you're supposed to pare it down into what is the most essential. And that makes good writing, because then it has brevity to it. So anyways, when I saw this guy was still super young, younger than I am currently, I was a little jealous, but also just mad impressed. Jealous I use in a joking sense, because what are young talented people but people you should be really impressed by? I also think the story of Chainsaw Man, and again, I don't know it intimately. I watched the show in the background over the course of like a weekend one time when I just had it on in the background while I drew my realistic take on Chainsaw Man, in the hopes that I better understand the character and maybe find something in there that helped my drawing. And so, even this lower jaw part here, I kind of designed it a little differently in my realistic drawing to how the character is drawn by the artist, Mr. Fujimoto. And so I've transferred that over here just to have some semblance of continuity between my ideas. Ultimately, on the realistic one, I had a face here, and I didn't do that this time, but Chainsaw Man, the way he draws it, it has like 3 slats here that shine through to kind of create the idea of an eye or humanity behind it. And I wanted to just design a shape that kind of looked like an eye. So anyways, I'm just trying to make it my own a little bit. Not out of disrespect for what he's created, but just to see if I can challenge myself in a way to iterate on existing design. Um, the movie was really good. At first I was almost a little bored by it, and I was wondering if and or when anything was going to happen, and then all of a sudden there's a certain point in the movie where everything turns on its head and violence erupts, and then it pretty much just never stops. Which, I think if you're into Chainsaw Man, that's probably what you're after. So there's a lot of straight lines here, and I think a lot of artists would just take their ruler and strike the line. But some comic books, when you flip through them, you'll notice like their lines are parallel, but they just went for it with their hand. And I think there's a lot of energy in that, and I am telling myself that I hope I will be brave enough to do that. It's a little awkward here, I'd maybe turn the page and strike them that way. But that's my goal. Like I said, I still don't know if I want to be doing, all cross-hatching like this, or flat blacks. I want to try and create interesting shadow shapes that I could do flat blacks with, and then have a lot of cross-hatching for texture and detail to create these gray tones. Having said that, I don't really know what the form is on it. This is kind of on a radius here, so you'd probably cross-hatch it with a pencil, kind of like that, and maybe create a bit of a line there. But I think for effect, I might just leave that pure white. Again, I don't have a particular style or adherence that I go for yet. This is technically my third, I guess my fourth ink drawing. I did one last year, let's see, which was just all cross-hatched, and it's not very good. I mean, I don't mind his face. The anatomy on his arm and chest isn't right. I wasn't as good at drawing then. I still always have a lot to improve upon. I could have, I actually do like his neck position there, but you could have realistically darkened all this out and come up with a unique, if I brushed it out here, a unique shadow shapes and stuff like that to make a more dynamic image. So I kind of like my Frankenstein. I really like the eyeball region. So anyways, I don't know, it's one of those fun moments where I get to practice art and just see what I come up with. And since it's not realism, I don't have to feel so terrible if it doesn't end up looking like the vision in my head. Because I'm kind of going into this without a vision. And that's a freeing feeling, because lately I've felt kind of trapped by realism. And so I think this is going to be a healthy part of the journey here. There's also just a lot of cool kind of mechanics or biomechanics in Chainsaw Man's design. So all this, I'll probably just go pure black for the gum area where the teeth insert. And like I said, I'm trying not to mind too much if the lines aren't perfectly straight. That's part of the human element to what I'm doing here. The central premise kind of Chainsaw Man is pretty interesting. It strikes me as very Japanese in its kind of imagery and iconography of
of physical manifestations of the devil or evil.
Which is, you know, I don't know if it has to do with
Belief systems or whatnot, but
I don't think that tooth is right, so I'm not going to ink that yet.
yeah, I don't know if it has to do with how they view spirits or whatnot. But part of the reason why Japanese horror tends to be really successful is that evil can basically take hold in inanimate objects as a memory or powerful, like, remembrance to something. So, for example, like The Ring, you know, evil is explicitly held in this videotape and it can be passed along. There's another one called Shutter where a camera captures a horrific event and so that camera is cursed effectively. And you know, there's plenty that are like that. And so in Chainsaw Man, the devil is found in the things, these archetypes that humans fear. And of course, one of those things that we fear on a primal level, or maybe not primal level, but at least in modern society level, is a chainsaw. And so, yeah, that's not bad. I think this could be a little more down, so I'm going to just widen that out as I go. Enter Chainsaw Man, as he kind of forms a pact with the chainsaw devil to absorb his powers when he needs to fight other devils. And of course, this chainsaw devil is very powerful. And let's be honest, it looks super cool to draw, and I'm sure coming up with fight scenes where this world where devils are physical things that humans are afraid of in terms of like weapons and all that. It's just a cool concept that holds up really well. Get these line weights a little heavier here to imply shadows. You know, I've seen Jim Lee draw, and he'll sometimes leave the pencil work to create gray tone too, which I like. I did it in the Frankenstein one, and I think it works well. I can't think of the artist's name, it's eluding me, but he does like all the artwork for Hideo Kojima. He does all the concept artwork for Hideo Kojima games and whatnot. And he uses ink. Again, I forget what the name of that brush he uses, but it's kind of a traditional, almost like ink wash, and sumi-e, I believe is what it's called now that I think about it. And I really like his style too. His style influences me more when I watercolor, but what I really like is the essential shadow shapes he creates to describe form. Or like when he's drawing legs, you know, by the time you draw like a thigh and then get down to the shin or calf, he might actually more like follow the bone and like just have this area wrap here, and then he might make a very like thin line there to identify the form of the calf and the shin, but really he's going to give you like a core shadow through there. I don't know, it's just a super cool way of highlighting what you're doing, and I think you get a lot more of that when you're not doing realism. You get to make all these choices about how you're going to showcase what you're trying to do. not doing these handles because I feel like I've done them wrong, but I mean, I guess why not? First, I'll start with this one. Yeah, nothing looks too bad. So this is one of those shadow shapes I was trying to come up with to be interesting. Was this area that's basically what is looks like his lower jaw. So I'm just gonna run my micron over it really quickly and see if I want to, brush that in fully. So I'm doing nothing with pure confidence here, so I'm just kind of like seeing what happens. So we got a tie here. Since he works for an organization that formally hunts devils, they have this system where he's basically a standard employee most of the time, wearing a suit and tie as if it's a benign office job, which adds to the kind of subtle humor of the whole thing. The show is funny. It is like a part action, part comedy, at least in the show. Again, I can't speak to the anime or the manga, but I do want to, if nothing else, get into looking at it solely for the art. Because when I was looking up stills of it, I just thought it looked super cool. And again, immediately jealous that the guy is so young and having and enjoying an awesome amount of success, hopefully. I mean, how cool is it to create new characters that people all around the world fall in love with? I mean, I feel like that's kind of the dream. So I have his tie flying back here, just to try and give it some element of the drawing, an element of motion.
I don't know if I'm very happy with this sleeve over here. I feel like it should be more bunched up and maybe wider, so I might hold off on doing that too. Swoop of the chest here. This is an area where I was trying to come up with, again, an interesting shadow shape of kind of like zigzagging to identify form in the fabric, but you know, I want it to be visually interesting to look at that shadow, because that's the whole fun of the ink drawing, is just the technical detail of the line work. And how fine you can get your lines. Like this is the line right here, the stitching where the buttons would be. Which when I first drew it, I didn't have his arm here, so this was much more drawn in the shirt and whatnot. Trying to think of if I read comics or anything like that as a kid, and I don't think I really did. I have this theory about comics that it's maybe something that you're exposed to more of if you live in urban areas where there's like buses and trains and things like that that you might get on every day with your parents to as they go to work or whatnot. And I live kind of out in the mountains in western Washington, and so there was never comic shops around or anything like that. Because whenever I hear about people reading comics, it's always that, you know, I was begging my mom for it before I got on the train, yada yada yada, or walking by down the street, and that was not a lifestyle that I had. And I don't know if that holds any water, that theory, but it just seemed like it might. Now, what I did have going for me in that regard, though, was that my dad is a big film person. At least he used to be. I don't know if he watches stuff that much anymore. I think he just watched Frankenstein on my recommendation. Just because I wanted to hear what he thought of it as a lifelong horror guy. But my dad was really big into like The Crow. And so I always, you know, in kind of learning about it, knew it was a comic book first, and obviously Brandon Lee's death kind of captured a moment in time there where everybody kind of became aware of something. And you know, then not long after that, by the time I was in like 5th or 6th grade, Blade came out, and Blade was just awesome as a kid. That was like the coolest thing. Alright guys, camera died, but caught it and we're back. I did briefly shade it in with pencil, the Chainsaw Man's kind of head here, to see how it looked, because I noticed in the comics it's kind of always grayscaled. And so I figured maybe I would do that
See, I'm still trying to come up with interesting shadow shapes, so I'm just gonna go for this one here. I think I'm gonna do something like, I feel like the image needs something all black back here, like some sort of splash of pure black ink or something to contrast. So that will happen. I kind of sketched it out here before, like Chainsaw Man art tends to have these kind of graffiti-like splashes in it, or it's possible for it too. So I wanted to try and pay homage to that. Plus, it would help compositionally, I think. I tried to make the teeth of the chainsaw varied and hopefully interesting and unique. I think on the realistic one, my version, I think I tried to make some of the teeth of the chainsaw look like real human teeth, which I also did here. Like, here's a molar. Here's kind of a canine type tooth. And I don't know if it added anything or not, but I just wanted to incorporate some realism into it and imply that maybe the parts of its face that are missing are utilized elsewhere on the body. I thought that fit more of like a body horror type of idea. Alright, I'm going to try and strike a straight line here. Same again here. I kind of messed up there at the end. Again, I'm hoping that I see other comic book artists do that, it gives it energy, because even if you fail, it just looks like human art still. There's something about digital art even still that just looks like, I feel like I can just tell when I look at it, the colors particularly, a lot of time, because a lot of people have come up with digital art that can quite honestly look a good bit like a pencil drawing or something like that, but the colors are almost so, I don't know, they're just they can just feel not real at times, which I'm not trying to come down on digital art. I mean, it is super useful to be able to do. I cannot do it. I mean, in terms of professional type work or something, it feels like the way to go. I need to draw. I didn't do that. I need to draw like part of his forearm, inside of his forearm, because so the chainsaws come out, you know, kind of like vertically, I believe, through, and it bisects his hand here. So if that blade, I mean, this blade can in theory be like two ways. It could either be in like 3/4 view, like that, in which case we would need to see like index and pinky finger over here and part of forearm. Or I suppose it could even be pronated like this, and then you'd need to see thumb and index. Which I already did thumb, index, and middle finger on this side. So I don't know. I don't know what I'll end up doing there. Either way, I can still do. I don't really have a good angle to do this at. I guess upside down is the best. That's not a very straight line because of the angle. So this is bunched up sleeve here, rolled up. He always has his sleeves kind of rolled up in a casual way because Denji is of course just a kid. He kind of came from an impoverished situation and he's kind of forced into servitude because his dad owed a debt to the Yakuza, naturally. Again, I want to think of an interesting shadow shape here. So this is that watercolor pen. If I dragged water over this, it would actually turn kind of blue, like a blue pen ink. But I'm just going to use it as my pure black.
The brush tip is actually really nice. It's pretty fine.
And at first I thought these were kind of hokey to use in doing watercolor.
Again, sort of
Wrongfully having a purist mindset of like, oh, I just need to only use watercolor brushes and traditional inks. But then I actually use these.
Of course, I was wrong. They're just super
Useful to use at times because, I mean, they have their purpose. I'm trying to come up with, I mean, the theme of this video is I'm trying to come up with more interesting shapes for a lot of traditional forms, at least more than I usually do. That's not to say I'm going to succeed at all. But I'm just trying to come up with shapes that I might not always simplify down. And by that I mean we usually start kind of with blocky shapes to identify form. And then we give them these organic
roundness and smoothness and edges.
and
Maybe that's not always needed. Maybe
you can create really interesting forms
by kind of retaining those simpler shapes.
And so in a way that's what I'm trying to do, or at least find some middle ground.
Like, I'm not just gonna draw like a square finger for a digit, something like that, for that I'm not gonna do. But if I can do some of that and then add in, some roundness there, crease, maybe there's a little something to that.
I know I'm not doing a whole lot of talking in this, and I don't really know what I have left to say about Chainsaw Man. I do think I'm going to rewatch the show. Let's see. That shadow shape there is pretty similar to what I'm going for. I'm going to add in little metal speck lines on this. Don't know if it'll look like it or not, but metal has those little shiny grooves. And this is going to have a bigger shadow behind it. Define that shape. And it might even have, like, in theory, a cast shadow. If the hand is a little out and the blade's coming, it might have a bit of a cast shadow onto it. Don't know if that'd add anything to the drawing in theory. So this, there's that little bump there. That comes down. Almost every hand I had drawing is my own. I don't know how else to get proper references. And as if you're struggling at all, I'm not saying I'm doing a good job, but with finding references, you know, remember you can use yourself for everything, especially if you have a light with a single source. You can play around with your hands or pictures of yourself if you need to, and at least get an idea of what something's supposed to look like shape-wise. I'm going to follow these sketchy lines that were from my pencil. I don't know if they're right or not, but I think they'll give energy to it. I'm having a really hard time not just punching in a dark background here to give myself an idea of how the contrast will look, but I still feel like I need to save that. The concept artist for Kojima that I was talking about, he always ends up doing these interesting like block shapes. He'll like just do rectangles or geometric shapes behind stuff to give it the contrast it needs. It's maybe not like, it's not a scene per se, but it just helps ground the character. I'm gonna have to sketch in what I think these should look like, these grooves. Maybe more like that. I'm just going to keep it rolling. I don't know if any of this is interesting or not. If you're still watching, then I presume it's because you're drawing along as well or something to that matter. And so maybe this helps you in some way. I kind of wish I had a little bit of white through there. I'm going to very lightly crosshatch this part of the tongue. I still think it could be more gray, so I'm just gonna use the pencil trick. Alright guys, welcome back. As you can see, I pretty much have finished up here. Like I said, I was gonna do like a very big black background, but then I started brushing this in, and number one, I realized it'd take a lot of ink, and I don't know how much this thing has. And then I just kind of started being creative with it, and I kind of like the effect of the splatter that he was giving off, so I just stuck with it for, like I said, for time, economical reasons, and because I thought it was kind of presenting some cool stuff. So stuck with it. There's maybe a lesson in there somewhere. But anyways, thanks for watching. I'm probably gonna keep trying to do ink drawings. I had a lot of fun with it. So I hope you'll tune in next time. I know these videos are getting pretty long. If you're still here, I really appreciate it. This is a long video, but maybe you're just drawing along or relaxing or have it on background. So anyways, I appreciate you guys. Catch you next time. Peace.